The night my younger brother opened his new medical clinic, my father introduced him to everyone in town like he had personally changed the future of healthcare. And maybe, in some ways, he had. Dr. Ryan Carter had the kind of success people in our small Ohio town understood immediately. A medical degree, a beautiful office, his name printed on the front of a building, the kind of achievement that made people straighten their backs when they talked about him. My father loved that. He loved telling people that his son was a doctor. What he didn't love was explaining what I did, because whenever someone asked about me, there was always a small pause before he answered, like he needed to prepare himself. "Emily works in emergency services," he'd say. And if the person looked interested, he would quickly add, "She's a paramedic." Then came the part that always bothered me. The little smile, the little shrug, the way he made it sound like he was explaining a phase I had never grown out of, as if one day I would finally wake up, realize I had made a mistake, and choose a more respectable life. I was 32 years old when I finally understood something painful. My father wasn't disappointed because I had failed. He was disappointed because I had succeeded at something he never respected. That night, the restaurant was filled with people my family had known for decades. Doctors, business owners, neighbors who had watched Ryan and me grow up. The kind of people who remembered when my father opened his first pharmacy downtown with nothing but a small loan and a dream. Everyone was celebrating Ryan. And honestly, I was happy for him. That part hurt the most. I wasn't jealous of my brother. I loved him. I just wished my family could see that there was more than one way to make a difference. My father raised his glass near the center of the room. "To Ryan," he said proudly. "Everything he's accomplished proves that hard work pays off." Everyone clapped. I clapped, too. Because that was what I had always done. I celebrated everyone else, even when nobody remembered to celebrate me. A few minutes later, one of my father's friends noticed me standing near the table. "Emily, right? What are you doing these days?" Before I could answer, my father stepped in. "She's still doing ambulance work." Still. That word landed harder than he probably realized. Still. Like I was stuck. Like I had been waiting 8 years for my real life to begin. The man smiled politely. "Oh, that's meaningful work." My father nodded, but then he laughed softly. "You know Emily. She's always been the one who wanted to save the world." A few people laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, but enough. Enough for me to feel that familiar pressure in my chest, that feeling of being reduced to a story someone else had written about me. I could have explained. I could have told them about the nights I worked 12-hour shifts, the accidents, the calls where every second mattered, the families who looked at me when they had no one else left. I could have told them that sometimes a person in a uniform is the only thing standing between someone and losing everything. But I didn't, because I had learned something during my years as a paramedic. Panic makes noise. Confidence doesn't have to. So I smiled. I picked up my drink, and I let them believe whatever version of me made them comfortable. What nobody in that room knew was that the woman they were quietly dismissing had spent the last decade walking into situations most people ran away from. They didn't know about the highway pileup where I kept a teenage girl alive for 40 minutes before the helicopter arrived. They didn't know about the winter storm rescue where my team found 3 missing children after everyone else had given up. They didn't know that my name had recently been submitted for a national emergency leadership program. And most importantly, they didn't know about the phone call I had received 3 days earlier, the one from someone whose name would change everything. Because while my family was busy deciding that I was the daughter who never reached her potential, someone much more important already knew exactly who Emily Carter was. And soon, everyone else would too. Most people think the hardest part of being a paramedic is what happens on the emergency calls. They imagine the flashing lights, the sirens, the moments when everyone else is panicking and you're the person who has to stay calm. And yes, those moments are hard. But honestly, those weren't the moments that tested me the most. The hardest moments were the quiet ones. The moments after I came home from a 16-hour shift, sat alone in my apartment, and wondered if my own family would ever understand why I chose this life. Because saving strangers was easier than convincing the people who raised me that my work mattered. I still remember one night early in my career. I had just finished a highway accident call during a freezing January storm. A truck had lost control on black ice, and several cars had piled up behind it. When we arrived, everyone was screaming. People were crying. Some were trapped inside their vehicles. And there was one little girl in the back seat of a crushed SUV who wasn't responding. I remember her mother's hand shaking as she grabbed my jacket. "Please," she said, "please don't let my daughter die." Those are the moments people don't see. The moments where you don't get to be afraid. You don't get to think about whether you're tired. You don't get to think about whether someone appreciates you. You just move. You do the job. You fight for one more breath. That night, we got that little girl out. She survived. Her mother sent me a Christmas card 6 months later. It wasn't expensive. Just a simple card with a handwritten note from a woman who probably didn't even realize she had changed my life. It said, "Thank you for being the person who showed up when our world fell apart." I kept that card in my locker for years, because on the days when I questioned myself, I needed a reminder. My work mattered, even if my family didn't see it, especially if they didn't. Over the next decade, I built a career that nobody in my hometown knew about. While Ryan was attending medical conferences and getting his picture taken for the local newspaper, I was training younger paramedics in emergency response. While my father proudly talked about his son's new clinic, I was spending nights studying trauma protocols after exhausting shifts because I wanted to be better. Not famous, not admired, just better. That was something I learned early in emergency medicine. The people who truly know their worth don't need to announce it every 5 minutes. The work speaks eventually. My supervisor, Karen Mitchell, was the first person outside my family who really saw me. She wasn't the kind of boss who gave dramatic speeches. She was practical, direct. The kind of woman who could look at you after a difficult shift and immediately know if you were pretending to be okay. One morning, after we finished a complicated rescue, she handed me a coffee and said something I'll never forget. "Emily, you keep waiting for people who don't understand this job to tell you that you're good at it." I looked at her and laughed. "I don't think that's true." She raised an eyebrow. "Really? Then why do you still get quiet every time someone asks what you do?" I didn't have an answer, because she was right. Some part of me was still that young woman sitting at the family dinner table, watching everyone celebrate Ryan while wondering why my dreams seemed smaller in their eyes. Karen leaned back in her chair. "Listen to me. A person who spends their life running toward emergencies isn't someone who failed. That's someone most people are too scared to become." I never forgot that. A few months later, something happened that even I wasn't expecting. Our department received a statewide recognition award after a major flood hit several counties. Hundreds of homes were damaged. Roads disappeared underwater. Families were stranded. Our emergency response team worked around the clock. During the rescue operation, I coordinated with firefighters, police officers, and hospital teams to make sure patients reached medical facilities before conditions got worse. Afterward, my name was submitted for a national emergency leadership program. I almost ignored the email. That sounds strange, but it was true. My first thought wasn't, "I deserve this." My first thought was, "Are they sure they meant me?" Because when you spend enough time around people who underestimate you, sometimes their voices become your own. But I accepted, not because I wanted to prove my father wrong, not because I wanted my brother to finally look at me differently. I accepted because somewhere along the way, I realized something important. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I was honoring the person I had worked so hard to become. And then came the invitation, the one that would bring me back into the same room with the people who had spent years misunderstanding me. A formal dinner celebrating Ryan's new clinic expansion. At first, I almost declined. Not because I was afraid, because I was tired. Tired of walking into rooms where I already knew the version of me people expected to see. But then Karen asked me one question. "Emily, are you avoiding that room because they don't respect you, or because a part of you still hopes they finally will?" That question stayed with me, because she was right. Maybe I wasn't afraid of seeing them. Maybe I was afraid of realizing I didn't need them anymore. So I opened the invitation again. I looked at my family's names. I looked at the date, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking back into that house as the daughter who had something to prove. I was walking in as Emily Carter, a woman who had spent 10 years running toward the hardest moments of other people's lives. And soon, whether they were ready or not, my family was finally going to see who I had become. I almost didn't go to that dinner. And honestly, looking back now, I think that decision says more about how much I had changed than anything that happened that night. Because 8 years earlier, I would have gone hoping someone would finally look at me differently. I would have walked into that room wanting my father to say, I was wrong. I would have wanted Ryan to admit that maybe I wasn't the family disappointment everyone had quietly decided I was. But this time was different. I wasn't walking in there looking for approval. I was walking in because I realized something. Avoiding people who hurt you can sometimes feel like protecting yourself. But sometimes it just means you're still allowing them to control where you can and cannot stand. So I put on a simple navy dress, left my EMT uniform hanging in my closet, and drove to the downtown Columbus hotel where the celebration was being held. I remember sitting in my car for almost 5 minutes before getting out, not because I was scared, because I was taking one last moment to remind myself I didn't owe anyone an explanation, not anymore. The hotel ballroom looked exactly like the kind of place my father loved. Polished marble floors, crystal lights, people wearing expensive watches and talking about investments, businesses, and things that sounded impressive at dinner tables. Ryan was standing near the entrance, shaking hands. Everyone knew him. Dr. Carter. Congratulations, Ryan. You've made your father proud. I watched my father smile beside him. That smile, the one I remembered from my entire childhood. The smile he wore when Ryan won awards, when Ryan got accepted into medical school, when Ryan's name appeared in the newspaper. Then his eyes found me, and just like that, the smile disappeared. For a second, I wondered if maybe I had imagined all those years of distance. Maybe he would surprise me. Maybe he would walk over and hug me. Maybe he would finally see his daughter. He didn't. He walked toward me slowly, looked me up and down, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Emily, what are you doing here?" Not hello. Not I'm glad you came. Just confusion. Like my presence was something that needed an explanation. I smiled politely. Ryan invited me. My father looked toward the room. This is an important night for your brother. I nodded. I know. His expression didn't change. I just don't want tonight becoming about something else. That sentence told me everything. 8 years had passed, and somehow he was still worried I would take attention away from Ryan. Before I could respond, Ryan walked over. He looked uncomfortable, not angry, almost embarrassed. "Emily," quietly, "I didn't know you were coming." I laughed softly. "That's because nobody told you." He looked away. That hurt more than I expected. Because Ryan wasn't a stranger. He was my little brother, the person I used to protect when we were kids, the person I helped with homework, the person I drove to soccer practice when our parents were busy. But somewhere along the way, he became the son everyone celebrated. And I became the daughter everyone explained. A few minutes later, one of Ryan's colleagues asked me a simple question. "So, Emily, what do you do?" Before I could answer, my father stepped in. "She's a paramedic." The way he said it made it sound smaller, like he was correcting a misunderstanding. The man smiled. "That's actually incredible work." I opened my mouth to say thank you, but my father laughed. "Well, she's always been the adventurous one." A few people chuckled. That familiar feeling returned, the feeling of standing in a room full of people and somehow still feeling invisible. But I didn't react. I had learned something from thousands of emergency calls. The person who stays calm usually has the most control. Then something unexpected happened. A woman I had never met before walked over. She was probably in her late 50s, wearing a hospital foundation badge. She looked at me for a moment, then her eyes widened. "Wait," she looked closer. "Are you Emily Carter?" I froze. "Yes," she smiled. "Oh my goodness, I thought so." She turned to the people around her. "Everyone, this is the paramedic who saved my grandson." The room became quiet. She explained that 3 years earlier her grandson had suffered a severe allergic reaction during a camping trip. Emily's team arrived before the ambulance from the neighboring county. She remembered every detail, the calm voice, the quick decisions, the way Emily kept the boy stable until they reached the hospital. I told her she didn't have to thank me. It was my job. But she shook her head. "No, your job was to show up. What you did after you showed up was something else." I saw my father's face change slightly, but he still didn't understand. Not yet. Then the ballroom doors opened, and a man walked inside wearing a dark suit with a hospital foundation pin. Several executives immediately stood. It was Michael Reynolds, the CEO of the largest healthcare network in Ohio, the man who had donated millions to emergency response programs, the man whose name everyone in that room recognized. He scanned the room, then he stopped, because he saw me, and without hesitation, he walked directly toward me. My father turned. Ryan turned. Everyone nearby started watching. Michael smiled. Emily Carter. The room went silent. Not because he said my name, because of the respect in his voice. He extended his hand. Thank you for saving my daughter's life. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My father's expression changed completely. Ryan looked like someone had just told him the world was upside down. Michael continued. I've been trying to meet you for months. Your response during the Riverbend flood saved dozens of people. The leadership program nomination was the least we could do. The woman who had recognized me earlier smiled. See? I told you she was special. And suddenly, the same people who had spent years seeing me as the daughter who didn't become a doctor were looking at me differently. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had won. Because standing there, with everyone finally seeing the truth, I realized something. Their opinion of me had changed in one moment. But my value? My value had never changed at all. The only difference was, they were finally catching up. For years I had imagined what it would feel like if my family finally saw me. I thought maybe I would feel angry. Maybe I would feel satisfied. Maybe there would be some moment where I could finally say, I told you so. But standing there in that ballroom, watching everyone suddenly treat me differently, I realized something unexpected. It didn't feel like winning, because when people only respect you after someone important recognizes you, it makes you wonder if they ever truly respected you at all. The rest of the evening felt different. People who had barely looked in my direction earlier suddenly wanted to know about my work. They asked about emergency response. They asked about the flood rescue. They asked how many lives I had saved. And I answered politely, because that was who I was. I didn't need to become arrogant just because people finally became curious. But I noticed something. My father was quieter. Very quiet. The man who always had something to say at every family gathering suddenly didn't know what to say to me. Ryan was different, too. He stayed near me for most of the night, almost like he was trying to rebuild 10 years of distance in a few hours. At one point, he looked at me and said, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I knew exactly what he meant. Why didn't I tell him about the awards? The leadership program? The rescues? The recognition? I looked at him for a moment. Then I answered honestly, "Would you have listened?" He didn't respond, because deep down he knew the answer. The truth was I had tried. Over the years I had mentioned things. A difficult rescue, a new certification, a leadership opportunity. But every conversation somehow came back to the same thing. Are you still doing that? Still. That one word had followed me for years. And sometimes the most painful thing about being underestimated isn't what people say about you. It's when you start wondering if maybe they're right. After the event, my father asked if we could talk. Not in the restaurant. Not in front of people. Just the two of us. That was something I noticed immediately. For the first time in my life, he wasn't trying to perform for an audience. We sat in his car outside my apartment. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. Then he finally spoke. I didn't know. 3 words. Simple. But coming from him, they carried more weight than I expected. I thought you were choosing something smaller. I looked out the window. That sentence hurt. Not because it was new, because it explained everything. He had never hated my career. He had never even taken the time to understand it. He had simply decided that anything different from his idea of success was automatically less valuable. I wasn't trying to disappoint you, I said. I know that now. His voice sounded different, older, less certain. I spent so many years telling people about Ryan because I thought his success reflected well on me. He paused, and I didn't realize I was doing the same thing by hiding you. That was the first time my father admitted it. Not that I had succeeded, but that he had failed. Not as a businessman, not as a provider, as a father. A few days later, Ryan came to my apartment. No fancy clothes, no professional image. Just my younger brother standing at my door looking uncomfortable. I owe you an apology, he said. I let him in. He told me something I never expected. He said that during medical school, one of his professors had once told him, "The best doctors know they are not the first people helping the patient. The first person who touches that emergency call is often someone like your sister." Ryan said he never forgot that, but somehow he forgot to apply it to me. "I was proud of being the successful one," he admitted, "and I didn't realize I was making you feel like the unsuccessful one." That conversation didn't magically fix everything. Real life doesn't work that way. 10 years of feeling invisible doesn't disappear because someone finally says sorry. But something changed. For the first time, my family stopped trying to compare our lives. They stopped asking why I didn't become a doctor. They started asking what my work actually looked like. And I started allowing them to learn. But I also learned something about forgiveness. Forgiving someone doesn't mean pretending they didn't hurt you. It doesn't mean handing them the same place in your life they had before. Sometimes forgiveness is simply deciding that their misunderstanding no longer gets to control your future. I had spent years hoping my family would finally see me, but by the time they did, I had already learned how to see myself. A few months after that night, something happened that I never expected. My father asked if he could come to one of our department events. Not a fancy dinner, not a fundraiser, not a room full of people where he could tell everyone what his children had accomplished. Just a regular gathering for emergency responders and their families. The kind of event where firefighters brought their kids, where spouses shared stories about long nights, and where nobody cared about titles or impressive introductions. At first, I wasn't sure what to say, because this was the same man who once told me I was wasting my life. The same man who looked at my career and saw a disappointment instead of dedication. But then I remembered something. People don't change because you force them to. They change when they finally become willing to see what they refused to see before. So I told him he could come. That evening, I watched my father walk into a world he had spent years ignoring. He met the people I worked with. The people who knew me not as Ryan's sister, not as the daughter who chose the wrong career, but as Emily, the person they trusted when things went wrong. He spoke with a firefighter who told him about a rescue we had worked together. He met a young paramedic I had trained who proudly said, "Emily is the reason I stayed in this job." My father listened, really listened, and I think that was the first time he understood that my life wasn't some temporary phase I would eventually grow out of. This was my life. This was the thing I had built. Later that night, during the recognition ceremony, my name was called. I walked onto the stage, accepted the award, and looked toward the audience. My father was standing, clapping, not the polite applause he gave at business events, not the kind people do because they are expected to. Real applause, the kind that comes from finally understanding something. And strangely, I didn't feel the victory I had imagined years ago. I didn't feel like I had proven him wrong, because the truth was, I stopped trying to prove him wrong a long time ago. The greatest change wasn't that my father finally respected me. The greatest change was that I no longer needed his respect to believe in myself. For years, I thought success meant reaching a point where the people who doubted me would have no choice but to admit they were wrong. But I learned something different. Success is waking up every morning knowing that the person in the mirror has lived honestly. Success is knowing you showed up when people needed you. Success is building a life that feels meaningful, even when nobody is watching. Today, my family relationship is different, not perfect. I don't think any family is. There are still conversations we have to work through. There are still moments where old habits appear. But now there is something we didn't have before. Honesty. My father no longer introduces me by explaining what I don't do. He simply says, "This is my daughter Emily. She's a paramedic." And for the first time, there is pride in his voice, not because someone important told him I mattered, but because he finally took the time to understand why I always did. Looking back, I don't think that dinner was the moment my family finally discovered my worth. My worth was never hidden. It was there every single day. During every emergency call, every sleepless night, every moment I chose to help someone else, even when nobody was applauding. The people who underestimate you may not recognize your value immediately. Sometimes they may not recognize it for years. But don't let their inability to see your worth become the reason you stop believing in yourself. Because the truth is, You were never waiting for them to give you permission to become someone great. You were becoming that person all along. The deepest lesson from Emily Carter's story is that your worth is not measured by how quickly other people recognize it. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who misunderstand our choices the most. They may judge our path because it does not look like the path they expected. Or they may value titles, money, and appearances more than dedication, kindness, and purpose. But a meaningful life is not built around gaining everyone's approval. It is built by staying true to your values, showing up when it matters, and continuing forward even when nobody is watching. Many people carry invisible wounds from being underestimated, dismissed, or compared to someone else. Maybe it was a family member who never understood your dreams, a workplace that overlooked your efforts, or a society that judged you before knowing your story. But one important truth remains: someone else's limited perspective does not define your potential. Sometimes the greatest victory is not proving your critics wrong. It is reaching a place where their opinions no longer control your confidence. At the same time, Emily's journey reminds us that people can change when they are willing to listen, reflect, and admit where they were wrong. Healing does not always happen through revenge or confrontation. Sometimes it begins with honest conversations, stronger boundaries, and the courage to finally see people as they truly are. If this story touched your heart, we would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone underestimated you, only to realize your true value later? Share your story in the comments below. If you believe stories like this can inspire others, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about resilience, courage, and the unexpected turns of life. May you always find the strength to trust your own journey, the wisdom to let go of what weighs you down, and the peace that comes from knowing your value was there all along. Wishing you hope, happiness, and brighter days ahead.